Now, is it just me, or is anthology horror films becoming really popular nowadays? And the ones responsible for bringing Southbound to us are some of the people responsible for the first two VHS movies. So like I said, some of the people responsible for the first two VHS movies are responsible for this movie called Southbound. And just like the VHS movies, this is an anthology horror piece. The difference, though, is if you didn't like the VHS films because they were found footage films, this is not a found footage film. So those of you that are horror fans that don't like found footage films, you can rejoice in knowing that Southbound is not found footage films. Southbound tells the tale of 5 separate horror short films. We have 2 men running from this Grim Reaper type spiritual figure. We have 3 young women whose van breaks down and gets picked up by this seemingly strange family who might be a cult. We have a man who accidentally hit someone with his car and now has to race against time to save her. We have a man that's trying to find his loved one and has to face all these demonic and really supernatural beings. And we have a family who moves into a new home only to be attacked by 3 people wearing president masks. So the last film is kind of like The Strangers, just with different masks. I really enjoyed this film. Now yes, I do love the horror genre, so I can be a little too easy on some of those genres, but I have to say this was a really great film. Now I can't help but compare it to the 2 VHS movies I've seen. I still haven't seen VHS Viral. I've heard really terrible things about it. But if I were to rank those first 2 VHS movies with Southbound, I would say that the first VHS was really good, but was lacking in a lot of areas, while VH2 was absolutely phenomenal, and Southbound is just on the cusp of being phenomenal. It's just barely not as good as VHS 2, but very, very damn close. But that's just my personal opinion. Now what I think Southbound has going for it that the VHS movies don't have is a very cohesive story. In the VHS movies, there is a story that connects all of them, but it's usually a pretty bland and just sort of is there just so we can connect the stories together. Essentially what it is someone is watching VHS tapes, and that's really the only thing connecting these short films. In Southbound, it's very different and it completely flows. You don't really get one big story connecting everything together. Instead, it's connected together through theme, through setting, because it's all set in different places on this highway, or more like country road. Thematically, it deals with a lot of people that have done something that they regret in the past. They've committed some sort of sin. And pretty much if you listen to the radio throughout the film, there's this guy that talks on the radio in different sections of the film. If you listen to what he says, it pretty much sums up what these short films are about. And not only that, these short films have a really nice flow to them. Instead of a film just cutting away and getting to the next short film, instead there are links between each film that flows into the next film. At the end of each short film, we're introduced to a character that eventually leads us into the next story. To help clarify, I'll show you a clip, and I'll try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible without giving too much away, but the only way to show how these movies connect is to show you the end of one clip and the beginning of a next one. So I'll just do the ending of the first film because it's the most spoiler-free. Without giving too much away, the first short film ends at a hotel. Something happens in the hotel room, which I'm not going to spoil, but the camera zooms out of the hotel room, zooms out of the door, and then it pans over to these women coming out of the next hotel room who are going to be the main characters of our next story. It is like that throughout, but sometimes it's not the main character of the story, but rather a character that will lead us to the beginning of the story where we can see our main character. I really liked how this movie did it, and it really helps with the theme, which I'm not going to spoil too much, because there is a specific structure of this film, which I don't want to give away because it would be too much of a spoiler. It helped me feel like this film was all set in the same universe, despite the fact that all these short films are something completely different with their horror element. Because some of them have a more realistic horror element, while others have a more supernatural, sometimes more monster-like horror element. There is definitely one thing that Southbound shares with the other VHS movies. These are all short films, so you don't really get a lot of backstory for the characters, you don't get a lot of character development. Because these are short films, you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of backstory, a lot of character development, a lot of character building. Instead, these films are very in the present, and there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of the horror elements that really aren't explained, but rather just happen, and they're still really fun and entertaining and unique. They still give enough for the audience for them to be able to interpret what's going on in the film, or interpret the horror element. That's what I've always found interesting about the first two VHS films, and that's what I found interesting in Southbound. Also, the score in Southbound, absolutely amazing and completely fits the movie. Now, the only issue I have with Southbound is some of the same issues I have with most anthology horror films. There are some short films that are much stronger than the other short films in the film. For me, the strongest two by far is the third one, which is dealing with a guy who has hit someone and now has to deal with the consequences of hitting that person with his car. That one is easily my favorite of the bunch. That one was very gory, very tense, very emotional. It actually had me on the edge of my seat. It was easily the best one of the five for me. The second strongest for me is the last one as well, not only because I like the story and I like the stranger's vibe it had to it, but also how it connected with everything, and the ending is just great and shows you what structure this film is. The first one and the second one were okay, but the weakest one for me is the fourth one. Because the fourth one started off strong, and then it just sort of falls apart for me. I mean, I still liked it, but easily the weakest one of the five for me. And while I said the first and second one are okay, they're still good, just not as amazing as the third one and the last one at the end. But that's one of the risks you have with anthology horror films. There's going to be some that are great and some that just miss the mark. And Southbound is no exception to that rule. But I have to say, Southbound was a really good film, and if you're a horror fan that wants to see something a little bit more conventional than The Witch, but not too conventional as more modern day horror films, then I suggest you go check out Southbound, because it was a really good film, especially if you're into anthology horror films and you don't want a found footage film like the first two VHS ones. Well, like all the VHS ones. And so I'm going to give Southbound 4.5 stars. It's not really 4.5 stars for me. It's in between 4 and 4.5, but it is closer to 4.5, so I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. So have you heard of Southbound? Did you see it? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. If not, what is your favorite anthology horror film? Mine would honestly be VHS 2 or one of the Creep shows. And if you like this video, please subscribe if you want to see more, and check out my 2015 and 2016 movie reviews. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.